everyone. Welcome to a special ARG event, which we don't have very many of those. We may have never had any ARG events. We are here with former ARG show alumnus, Dean Bent, the Dean Bent. Dean, it's great to finally meet you.
It's good to actually see you guys and to be doing this. This was unexpected, but great to be here.
It's great to have you, Dean. We've got a little bit of time, so we're not gonna screw around. We're just gonna jump in because your career is long and vast, and I want to get some explanation on some of this stuff. Before there's always I've got to know just out of the gate. How did you grow up as a gaming fan? Were you eager to get involved in it? Like, what was your path to your career choice?
It's funny you say that actually, because I see you've got a Coco there.
Yes,
Um,
we do.
so my first machine was a Dragon 32,
Oh yeah.
same machine basically. So
Absolutely.
that's what got me started, and I was back in those days super addicted to it. And it was a case of I was studying in school and everything was going in a certain direction, but I was somehow addicted to the gaming and the computing and stuff. And back in those days, my dad would shout at me for like, burning the electricity and all that, and nothing good is going to come out of this gaming stuff. Um, but eventually, computing sort of stayed with me even through education, then my first jobs, and then eventually I just applied to a job at US Gold, and thinking, I'd be kind of everyone there would know a lot more than me, and I wouldn't stand a chance. But they liked me, gave me a job, and the rest is history. So
I got to ask you, Dean, of course, I've got your little bio here you helped me with, and you've got something written here that you sort of glossed over. According to what you wrote here, you showed up for the interview a week early. What's up with that? I mean, that I've heard of promptness.
yeah, it was. I had a few interviews, and I somehow got the dates mixed up, and it was close to Christmas, and I just showed up there, and this guy Tony Bourne, who was the head of their QA department, he interviewed me, and then halfway through the interview, he said, "You do know you're a week early." And then I came back the following week and saw the people who, several other people, because he'd already seen me, and they were all quite impressed. So yeah, it was at the time when I had a 486 PC. I just upgraded by adding a sound card and the CD-ROM drive, so it was now a multimedia machine. And not that many people were doing that kind of thing back then. So they were like, "Oh, this guy knows what he's doing." So yeah.
Now, you worked, of course, you said, as we just mentioned, your first job at US Gold, you were doing support, right? Customer support.
Yep.
I got to ask, because I mean, US Gold was throwing games around left and right. They were a prolific publisher back in the day. And I can
Yep.
imagine that they were getting all sorts of action on those support lines. I mean, what was it like in those halcyon days when they were on fire working in their customer support area? Like, what kind of stuff would you do back in them days?
Okay, so the calls were basically you could split them into two. There were gameplay calls. People were stuck on Cruise for a Corpse or Secret of Monkey Island or whatever, and they needed help. Um, or else there were technical support calls. As PCs were the thing, it was a case of how do you get 600K of base memory to run Elder Scrolls or something like that?
Oh man.
Um, and so yeah, that was tricky. You were talking people through setting up their autoexec.bat and their config.sys, and just telling them how to, when the Rebel Assault was crashing, you'd have to tell them, oh, it's the sound card, IRQ7 can crash it, blah blah blah. It was an interesting time, but we'd get maybe each person would get 100 calls a day at least,
Oh, how many people were
and
working in customer support?
I think we had five at the peak. Yeah.
Holy
So
smokes. Wow. That's maximum capacity then
yeah.
on those lines. Now, you somehow, and you could explain how this happened. How did you go from doing that to somehow getting involved with quality testing? of the games. I mean, that
Mm.
and as someone who was working the phones, were you happy to not work the phones and go to the quality testing? Because then you can sit around
Yes.
playing games. Like, what was that like?
Absolutely. It was a nice change, shall we say. The testing team were a couple of doors away, and they'd have a lot of overtime because, when it's crunch time, it's all hands needed. So they'd often come to us for help, and so I was always happy to join them, and that's where I started to learn about testing. So yeah,
Were
nice
there
bit of
any
overtime. So
were there any hiccups making that transition? I mean, going over to testing, did you find yourself a fish out of water, or did you kind of flow into it naturally?
yeah, it was natural, I think. I mean, we're just sitting there playing games. It was, you know, um, back then we barely even used databases and stuff to log the bugs. We just use a Word document and stuff. So,
Did you hand it
um,
directly to a programmer in those cases?
no, we worked with the producers, and the producer was the one who kind of had to relay all the issues back to the dev team. So,
Were there any games you remember from back in your days at US Gold that were particularly buggy that that you guys just got slammed? It was poor
mm.
work.
I remember, so we looked after the first Elder Scrolls game back then.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, except the first release had a bug that meant you couldn't finish it.
Ooh.
And I remember speaking to, I think he was a lawyer or someone, but he was a really angry customer, and he had taken the week off work to play the game, and he got to this bug, and he was about to sue us, basically.
Wow.
You don't want to piss off the lawyer that's a game player. That's a
Yep.
bad times. Now, moving along, now of course, eventually, you've got this in your little bio here. Eventually, Eidos bought US Gold.
Mm.
Now, so you spent some time with Eidos as well after that, or were you, when they did the transition, did you move on?
Yeah, I spent about a year, I think, with them. It was funny, just before Eidos bought us, we'd bought Core Design,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, those guys are really good. And that was when Tomb Raider was being developed. So I stayed with Eidos. I think I left after Tomb Raider 2 or something like that. So yeah,
Was there, it's amazing. If you think about it, how huge US Gold was and I mean, they were the biggest player for a while.
yep.
Were you surprised that they got bought like that?
Yeah, it, it was unexpected, but it was a case of a lot of other companies have started to catch up and overtake US Gold.
Yeah.
Um, I remember Virgin Interactive seemed to be our big competition at that time. Um, and basically these guys at Eidos, they had money. So, you know,
That seems to
um,
always win.
yep,
Uh, Now you went from Eidos. Is that when you made the jump over to Rage, or did you
yep.
have a little? Was there like how did you make that? How did that happen? Moving to Rage, is that in this situation where you just applied and went in, or did they? Okay, that's so they didn't come and get you. You went there.
Yeah, no, I went there and they liked the fact that I'd been okay, so Rage were a game developer and they wanted to be a publisher.
Yeah,
And because I was working for a publisher, they liked the fact that, what I could bring to them. They had no knowledge of customer support, no knowledge of QA even. They literally had artists and programmers. So when I came in to set up firstly, it was to set up the customer support department. But then I realized the need for QA was probably bigger. So even though well, at that point, then I pulled in a couple of the guys who I knew from US Gold to join us. And then we started off a small team. And at that time, we were doing both customer support and QA. So
How many teammates did you bring in with you from the other company?
from US Gold, just two others,
yeah.
two really good guys. And eventually, everyone else we had after that, we just hired from fresh and just trained them. So I think in the end, we had maybe 15 people.
I remember Rage, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Dean, but weren't Rage One of the guys, they were sort of, I remember them from the PC in the 3D card world. Am I wrong here? Am I? And they were getting in on that sort of like the Monster 3D and all that other stuff that was, because I remember early 3D was I couldn't afford any of it, but I remember seeing it. I do remember their name popping up on there, and of course they ended up moving around to the consoles as well. So were you were there? How long had they just started kicking in on the 3D about your time, or had they been in it for a while?
So yeah, so I remember Tomb Raider back at US Gold or Eidos. We had they released patches for that to work with all the popular 3D cards at the time,
Yeah.
3D FX, and that was massive business. And when I moved to Rage, and I saw that they were working on some cool 3D games, I contacted the guys I knew at Orchid who were doing the 3D FX cards back then, and they started doing deals. I mean, I wasn't in that field. We had sales guys who took care of all the rest of it, but it was a case of Incoming, which is the 3D game that we started working on when I moved to Rage. That got eventually bundled with just about every video card that was going.
Yeah.
Back then
pretty
there
good
was a
game, too.
huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was it was it was a looker. It played well. Perfect thing to bundle with your new video card. So
We when we did the your Dean Bench show, I believe I see you did Beckham soccer, I believe, and I did a soccer game too. And they were both Rage games. By the way, I was a big fan of the. I thought the Beckham game was great. My kid got into it. He still plays it. How were the times at Rage? Because it's funny. I mean, they were a big company, and then they sort of weren't, right? I mean, that's pretty much the way it went down, right?
Yeah. So back at the sort of turn of the century, we had the .com boom, and Rage were somehow recognized as being an important company then, and we grew and grew and grew on the strength of that alone. I think at the peak we had 10 studios around the UK.
Wow.
Yeah, and my team were the only QA department. So basically, whenever a studio had a title which was coming to completion, like getting towards beta, we would send a team of our guys to work at their studio to help them finish off the game. So yeah, it was Rage were amazing. They've got a massive history before even before I joined. But yeah, they were massive in the 3D PC game arena, and then they also moved into console as well. So
Did you when you came out of course you started at US Gold as working the phones, and now you've moved on to Rage, and you're actually gaining some prominence here. I mean, is Rage where you really started moving up dramatically up the pecking order there because I mean that's what was that transition like? I mean, did you come into the US Gold with a lot of good praise from there? I mean, how did you move up so, I don't want to say quickly, but I mean, you went up the scale. What would you attribute that to? What was that like?
Interesting. I would say it's a relatively small industry. So people talk. Your reputation kind of precedes you, if you like. So if I did a bad job at US Gold, they would have known about it. But I think, yeah, one of my boss at Rage actually knew someone who worked at US Gold and said good things about me. So it wasn't so difficult. It was like I just kept doing what I was doing previously, just a guy who was happy to be working in gaming, really. So
did you have a favorite game over there that you were involved in?
At Rage, I guess it would have been Hostile Waters. Antaeus Rising, I think that was the subtitle of the tagline. But that was, yeah, we were all really pleased on that one. Yeah. Can't think if there's anything else. I love Denki blocks as well. That was the sort of the same guys who did David Beckham, Go Beckham, yeah. Denki blocks is a fun puzzle game as well.
That's one of the ones I've actually heard of from that group. Now, so we mentioned that Rage just closed its doors, probably mostly unexpectedly. And so were you there to the bitter end, or had you already jumped out? You were. So what's it like? I mean, I don't want to kick a company when it's but what's it like to see a company like that just fall apart, especially if you've worked hard and you're gaining prominence in it? What's that like?
Yeah, it was sad times actually. We were there knowing that we basically once we had 10 studios, the headcount was just too much to sustain a game taking 1 to 2 years to develop, all those salaries to pay, all those studio costs to keep. So it was sad because, you know, you could see 1 or 2 studios being either shut down or sold off or whatever. The really sad thing from my point of view was we pretty well had a good run. The last few games we did things like we had the Rocky license, and we did a really good game on back then. I guess it was GameCube, Xbox One, PS2, and we also had the Lamborghini license just waiting to come out, and that was a really nice racing game. And I think basically we'd started to make money, and from what I understand, that was when the bank decided to shut us down because they got their money back and they didn't want to take any more risks. So
Crazy.
yeah.
It's funny how that, I mean, that's backers are everything in this stuff. And that's, you know, it is a tragedy, but I'm not terribly surprised. That's just sometimes it happens. You know, I know you left there and went to an outfit called Babel Media, but I'm going to skip ahead here because I want to make sure I talk about this while we got you here for a limited amount of time. I want to talk about your time at Nokia. I'm sure you knew this was coming because when you sent me this information, I was giddy, having tangled with the N-GAGE myself. They moved you out to Germany, right, to work
Yep.
as the N-GAGE QA manager. So I've got to ask you right away. Here you are. They show you the technology that they ultimately assume will be the N-GAGE. So you're getting in there probably before the thing's been manufactured, still in the planning phase, I'm guessing. You stop me if I'm wrong here. So give me what was the process of that getting that thing off the ground?
Well, actually, so at Babel Media, that was when I had that was when I was introduced to the N-GAGE, and it was all very secretive and hush hush there because it was not yet launched, and they wanted me to work on the launch titles, get them all ready for release. So back then, we actually had production units even when I was at Babel. And then when I moved to Nokia itself, um, it was already, let's say, 6 months in. It was a going concern at that point. It was, I mean, it was disappointing when we learned that under the hood it was just a regular phone. It was nothing special, no gaming hardware.
Because up to a certain point, you had thought otherwise, right? I mean, you thought this was going to be a bigger hardware spectacle than it turned out to be. Was there a change? Was there a point where it was going to be that, and then they changed it to just being a phone?
I think back then, Nokia were new to gaming, so they just assumed it was a powerful phone with an ARM processor, which was, I don't know what speed.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, at that time they thought it was PS1. You could compare it to a PS1, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was
No, it was not. Clearly,
nowhere near. Yeah. So I think they had to learn themselves about gaming. And I remember we worked for a long time on the sequel or successor to the N-GAGE. We called it Game Deck 2. And that would have been special if that was ever released. That had at the time the big portable device would have been the PSP, and this would have killed it basically. This would have been so much more powerful.
Really?
Yeah, it was. It was I don't know. You'd imagine something like like the communicators, which was sideways, sort of, and you flip up the screen and you have the whole game deck thing. And it had I think at the time the most powerful processor was the 600 megahertz ARM. I think the PSP was something like 33 megahertz, something like that. And it would have had accelerated graphics and everything. But in the end, they decided, that's quite a risk for Nokia. They're not really making money on the N-GAGE, and they would have to spend a lot of money on a new device. So they decided, no, that's never going to happen. So
Now, you tangled, you QA'd a good chunk of the N-GAGE library, software library, correct? When as that stuff was passing through you, what were your feelings? I mean, did you think to yourself, maybe we'll pull this off, or did you think to yourself, we're boned?
Um, I knew that the days were kind of limited, if you like, because no one, no external, no third-party publisher took the chance to release a game on the N-GAGE. It was all funded by Nokia. And you know that you can't fund the entire ecosystem
Yeah.
without, it's just never going to work. So even though we had people like EA and Sega and those guys releasing games, Nokia funded everything. So I was quite pleased, I have to say, with a lot of the games, we did in Europe. For example, Colin McRae Rally, I think that won some sort of, was it a BAFTA award or something like that for a mobile game that was like unheard of. And we worked with some developers who really could get the most out of it. Like Tomb Raider, I thought was actually decent on the device. But then you'd do a game like Sonic and it just couldn't even do the scrolling properly, So it was a weird device, just not really ideal for gaming.
I'm just this is my curiosity. Did you have an N-GAGE that you carried around and used and played with, like on your free time? That's the key, isn't it? That if something's a success or not.
No, I of course we all had the device. I probably got 3 or 4 knocking around somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think I'd rather at that time, I think it was Game Boy Advance, or no, it was a Nintendo DS, I think I'd rather be using, so.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that the successor to the N-GAGE, because I honestly didn't realize one had even been thought. I just assumed that N-GAGE was such a disaster. They were like, we're out. So the fact that they got when you say that you heard about the specs, I mean, how far do you figure they got into the sequel? I mean, they didn't have a prototype or anything, I'm sure, but
No.
did they had the stats set up for it? Like they were fairly close to thinking about going for it, you figure?
Yeah, they got to the point. So at this point now, they're starting to talk to us about what we think we should have in a gaming deck, rather than just some guys out there somewhere creating what they think we want. And so we had some level of involvement in, you've got to do it this way, you can't do it this way kind of thing. It's got to be landscape gaming. You can't do portrait gaming on a device like that. So they were listening, and I think it may have even got to the point where they started speaking to the hardware companies about getting the chips and stuff. But the big thing was that there had to be some huge board meeting where they had to decide basically to go or not go with it. And that was when they decided, it's too much, we're not going to go. So there was no prototypes or anything.
Sure.
Now, Nokia, they're out of, where's it? Is it Finland they're out of? Where were they out of? So were you living over in, because it says here you had been in Germany, but were you at some point you moved to Finland proper, correct?
Yep. They moved me to the head office after about 2 years.
I hear a lot of people that are sort of doing your same sort of work. They move a lot. Is that just part of the parcel and part of the trade of doing what you do? You get moved different countries a lot. What did you think about all the movement that you were going through?
Yeah, it just made life interesting. I was never, I mean, I actually didn't want to move to Finland, I have to say. My family are Jamaican, and
Really?
I never wanted to move to a cold country.
No, that was my next question, because I hate the cold. And where were you? Like Helsinki or somewhere? I mean, it's double cold up there. We got friends up in Finland. I don't know how they do it. So I can imagine. So Nokia sold. Did they sell their whole N-GAGE division? Is that what happened to? They sold parts. They sold to Microsoft. Is that right? Am I remembering correctly?
Actually, the whole company was just
the
sold
whole
to
company.
Microsoft.
I couldn't. Gosh.
10 billion.
Did you do it some time at Microsoft as well, or were you out the door?
No, I was already gone at that point. So basically, a Canadian guy, Stephen Elop, was the CEO at this point, and he straight away started axing people left, right, and center to try and cut costs.
Yeah.
we didn't realize at the time it was kind of he was kind of grooming the company for a sale to Microsoft. So
Uh,
he was just cutting down the costs
Trying
and
to
the
make it more
overheads and everything.
attractive
Yeah,
from a bottom line. Yeah.
yeah. Mm.
Now, according to your notes here, as I look down this, you left Nokia and you set up your own company and ended up working for the Angry Birds people. Is that right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
sounds it. So how did this all come about?
Um, okay, so we'd worked a bit with Rovio when I used to be at N-GAGE. So they were doing bounce for us at that time. And when Angry Birds came, when I started my own company, and I was like, I don't know, I just thought I got to start approaching companies, and they were the first one I approached, and they remembered me from Nokia. And so they were happy to start working with me. So again, I had to hire a few guys. I hired all the early QA team actually. I think some of the guys are still there. But at that time they were, I don't know, like 50 people maybe. Um, and then when I left, there was at least 80. And then a few years later, they became 800. And I honestly do not know what all those people were doing. But yeah, Rovio, they obviously grew a lot with Angry Birds, and it was a fun project. I worked on the first three Angry Birds games, um, but I'm kind of glad I left when I did because they just kept doing the same thing over and over again. So yeah,
Yeah, they definitely milked
disappointing.
it for probably longer than they should have.
Yeah, yeah.
I still play that game, by the way. My kid plays it. The Star Wars one, the regular one, and we also saw the film. So I ended up. My kid was a big fan. I mean, I think they're fun games. I always
Oh,
thought they were fun.
absolutely. Yeah.
So
Definitely.
listen, if that's something to hang your hat on. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, that's a game that was like a big time. That made a ton of money off that. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It was for a while. I didn't need a CV. I just say, hey, I worked on Angry Birds, and
Yeah, that's
everyone
all you.
knew that.
When you work on a huge title, like I mean, you were sort of in there with Tomb Raider came around. Here you're sort of working on how big of a does that give you a good boost when you're looking for work or whatnot?
Yeah, it's when you when you work on the cool games that like have financial success, that's always a nice bonus.
Yeah.
But then you often work on other games which aren't so successful, but I don't know, you have a good rapport with the team or something, so that's also nice as well. So,
Word of mouth is a real big deal.
mm,
Yeah, reputation. That makes sense. You know, we're running out of time here, but there's a couple things I want to get to for sure. And one of the things that you'd written up here is that you did a little stint here at Codemasters.
yep,
Uh,
yep.
Codemasters, I've always heard they're an odd group. Well, what was it like to run through Codemasters?
Um, yeah, okay, so Codemasters had several sites, several studios. I was working in the Birmingham studio, which strangely enough is kind of like the remnants of Rage. Um, the Birmingham studio was bought by Vivendi and then by Codemasters. So there
Yeah,
were maybe 20 guys I was already familiar with because we used to work together at Rage. So that was a really good job for me, a really good position. The only thing is I was working on the mobile version of the Formula One game,
oh yeah.
and the developer they weren't good. They weren't good. Probably the worst I've ever worked with, if I'm honest.
Oof.
But the team in Birmingham and Codemasters generally, put it this way, last week I went out for a meal with two of them. We still
There
got
you
on really
go.
well. So
You know, we talked about your globe trotting, according to this bio here, you went to work for a crew named Spirisoft out of Russia. Is that right? So you moved to Russia for a while.
yeah,
What was that like?
yeah. That was interesting times actually. It was up. I just fancied a change
Yeah,
and definitely got it there. I okay, so I applied for this job and had three interviews, and each interview we were talking about moving to Krakow in Poland. Um, and I started doing my research on the place. It looked like it was a nice town, and after the third interview, they wanted to speak to me, and I'm like, oh, maybe I messed it up or something. I don't know. It doesn't sound good when they just want to speak to me. And I'm like, okay, they're going to give me some feedback, I guess. But they said, actually, Dean, we want you to join us, but we don't want you to join in Poland. We want you to join in our Russia office in St. Petersburg. And I was like, really? How come? They said, well, the project we wanted you to work on has changed, so we now want you to work on this project. And they went through all the benefits, and I was like, okay, it sounds like it's a good deal. So it was initially an 18-month contract. And I thought, yeah, this is fine. And then after that finished, they gave me another 12 months. So ended up being in Russia for 2.5 years.
Wow. That's crazy. At least you were there during the quiet times.
Yeah,
That's for sure. You worked on some pretty big stuff too. Rainbow Six, Siege, which I've got the TeamSpeak regulars. My gaming crew love that game.
All right.
And the Mortal Kombat mobile stuff, and a few other things that like Halo Infinite. That's interesting. So, and now you're working on obviously at this point in your career stuff that much more modern stuff that people that are into modern gaming might know about. You ended up after getting out of that. Ultimately, I guess you're still there. Tell us what so you've left Russia, and we're entering the more current era of your life here in terms of what you're doing. So talk us through what you've been up to in the past several years, because you've been working on some interesting stuff.
Yeah. So I actually moved back to Finland. So this is now my second stint living in the cold country. I can't get them.
They never send you to Tahiti, do they?
No. I'm jinxed like that. I don't know. But yeah, I moved back to join this company called Housemarque, a Finnish gaming company. They did things like oh God, what did I remember in the Amiga days they did this superb looking sort of asteroids game. I forget the name of it. But yeah, those guys have been going around forever, and they were working on this game called Returnal when I joined them, PS5 game. And when they showed me during the interview, I thought, I want to work on this game. This is like, this is such a cool looking game. But I didn't end up lasting too long there because I joined at the start of the pandemic, and it was just weird. I was managing teams from a hotel room. It just didn't work for me. So when a mate of mine at Nvidia contacted me and said he thinks they have the perfect job for me, and I was like, okay, let's give it a go. And I ended up getting that job, and that worked out much better because those guys are kind of used to this remote work life. So I tend to work from home mainly, and I've been working on such big global AAA titles like Cyberpunk and Guardians of the Galaxy. More recently, Alan Wake 2, all these big global games, and we now work on adding the latest technology like path tracing or ray tracing to these games, and it's a cool world. I'm still doing what I like to do. I still want to be working with games, but now it's back to working on the hardware side, right? Working with games, but working for a hardware company, just like the Nokia times. Yeah.
I love your story because you started out in the trenches, and I mean, ultimately worked your way up to one of the biggest companies, if not the biggest company on the planet, Nvidia, they've been off the charts here recently.
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's what I enjoyed. I enjoyed hearing and looking at your exploits because they were just so diverse, especially coming from US Gold and moving all the way up to Nvidia. And everything in between. I found it quite amazing. Do you still play games in your spare time? Or are you burnt out when you get home? Or do you still go home and have a game or two now and once in a while?
Of course, I play games. That's what it's all about.
When you go home to play a comfort game, what do you throw on?
I shouldn't admit this. I've been playing this Bloons game for like 10 years at least. This tower defense game.
Bloons 6?
Yep.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Such a good game.
It is.
That's great.
I sometimes play Forza Horizons as well. I play online with friends. Or what I've started playing the Doom reboot as well. Was it 2019 when it came out? A few years
Yes.
back.
Yep.
And that one I really loved. So I've gone back to it for a second time, which rarely happens, you know.
That's great. Well, listen, Dean, we appreciate you taking some time to talk to us on Sunday afternoon. We've been trying to get this together for a while, so it's great to finally talk to you and meet you. It was great when you touched up with me on email. I was surprised, but it's so much fun. I really enjoyed your episode too. It's one of my favorite ones we ever did, just because it's so wacky. And hopefully we can get you back sometime for a deeper dive because there's some stuff I really want to dig into that we get to just barely glaze. But thank you very much for hanging out with us, Dean, and hopefully we'll keep in touch in the future. And good luck. God knows where you're going to go next, and who knows what horribly cold country. If they put a studio up in Antarctica, you'll be ready to go.
Oh, please give me one hot country.
Thank you very much, Dean.
Thanks,
Dean.
guys.